The views and opinions expressed on this program are those of the participants and do not reflect the views of BronxNet or the program underwriters.
BronxNet. Your voice, your views, your vision.
Good evening and welcome to BronxTalk. Over the last decade, there's been a wide discrepancy between plans that developers in the city have for Bronx communities and the agendas of the Bronx residents in those communities. Tonight's guest has been appointed by the borough president to represent the Bronx on the City Planning Commission, and the hope is that he can help bridge that wide gulf. If you want to join the conversation about city planning for housing, industry, parks, businesses, or anything else, then call in the show at 718-960-7241. You can also email comments to us at bronxtalk@hotmail.com, and we'll read those on the air during a future edition of Bronx Talk. Tonight, we welcome the chair of Community Board 2 and the Bronx representative on the City Planning Commission, Orlando Marin. Good evening, and thank you for joining us.
Thank you, Gary. Good evening.
It's a pleasure to have you, and congratulations on the appointment. Before we even talk issues, I guess it must be something of joy for you to represent the Bronx on the commission.
It actually is, because it gives me the opportunity to discuss and talk about issues within my borough that to me have been very important and the catalyst for behind my decision to become an architect.
Mm-hmm. Give me a vision. Tell me, okay, now I've got the position. This is something I've wanted to do. You've obviously been on the planning board and community board too. You've been involved in real estate for many, many years. Give me a vision as you undertake this responsibility on behalf of the Bronx of what kinds of things you'd like to see happen and you'd like to actually do with the City Planning Commission.
Well, one thing is that's very important to this borough. You know, we're a waterfront borough, is the development of our waterfronts. And for years, we have had our waterfronts for manufacturing districts, industrial districts. And throughout history, the use of those districts has diminished. And our contemplation for what those districts should become really hasn't come to fruition. And now is when we have the opportunity to work with communities, like the Hunts Point community, to develop those areas, those greenbelt areas, those waterfront areas, into areas for community as well as for industry that can live within each other. There are some districts there, manufacturing districts, that don't have noxious uses, which can lend themselves well to both pedestrian and industrial manufacturing use.
Rather than lead the questioning here, I'm going to just leave it open. So what are the challenges to being able to really convert those areas into usable and even green spaces for the people of the Bronx?
Well, some of the challenges are identifying the uses within that district and seeing how you can consolidate some of those uses. Some of those uses don't need to be waterfront anymore. They can be more upland. And
explain what you mean by that.
Well, upland is anything that's away from the water, and in zoning talk, it's basically you look at areas 100 feet or more away from water. So as further upland you go, away from the water, that's what we consider upland. Mm-hmm. And those areas, you know, of waterfront that we have some manufacturing districts that have kind of outlived their use because they're not
as manufacturing districts.
As manufacturing districts.
So are these private lands? Are they public lands? And then do you have to get somebody to develop it? Is it asking the city to pony up money, which of course is not likely to happen in the foreseeable future? What's the process that you would undergo, and do you have a specific spot in mind that, let's say, that you would start with that you'd like to create a vision for? And let me just, before you answer, explain one of the reasons for asking this. I always like to have the people of the Bronx get a vision for the borough of how we can do better. You're in a position to do that. You've got the floor. What do you see? What can we do?
I see a lot of collaboration with communities, because that's key. That's identifying specific uses that a community has identified and working with that community, working with the local politicians, the local religious groups, making sure that what is planned for the community works within the community and takes a look at the entire community. Are there enough schools? Are there enough residential sectors? Are there enough industrial sectors? Is there enough open space for the community to enjoy themselves?
Mm-hmm. There's a perception out there, and I'm sure I could come up with any number of examples of it, that if Mayor Bloomberg has a developer in mind, that can develop an area. We can certainly use the Kingsbridge Armory as a specific facility. If he's got an agenda in mind that he's going to push for that, whether it's necessarily what the community wants or not. In these cases, are there those kinds of developers out there that are going to, as I said at the intro of the show, going to butt heads with communities? Or do you find that in these cases there's going to be kind of a symbiotic relationship with the city of New York?
You're always going to have a time where developers butt heads with communities, because what their vision is may be different from what the community needs. They may not understand totally what the community wants, which is why it's so important to have these dialogues with the community at hand so you can understand what they're looking for. I really think that developers these days are understanding that it is important, very important, to work within communities to take a look at what it is that they are actually needing, what the community needs, what's going to benefit the community, what's going to support once it's developed. Because if you develop something that really the community can't uphold, then you're developing a white elephant. It's sitting out there.
This, of course, hasn't been the case in the recent past. That many developers have said, "Hey, we're coming into a community, and we're going to do what we want," and they simply ram it through. And there are many examples of it. Before I move into some of those examples, I wanted to get back to what I asked before.
Sure.
Do you have a location in mind in terms of an example of the kind of waterfront development that you were talking about at the outset?
Sure. I'm from Hunts Point, so I can specifically speak to Hunts Point, where we have a lot of manufacturing districts that at the back of the district has a waterfront connection that may or may not be in use. And one of the green belt missing links is that link around Hunts Point, where some of those parcels are difficult to get to. It's creating these easements that allow the development of the park, of this waterfront system that allow you to walk around. It's that type of a collaboration that helps us understand that we can live manufacturing and pedestrian living all at the same time.
Would you turn it into a park and ask the city to rezone that land and all of a sudden say, you know what, this is now going to be parkland? And is that going to be possible? I mean, is this city property or are these private properties?
Well, that's something that we have to grapple with, because some of the parcels are city parcels. So getting a jurisdiction over those parcels are pretty easy. If the intent is to continue the waterfront, the green belt. On the private parcels, it presents more of a challenge, because now you have to have insurances to make sure that anybody traipsing through the green belt, if they get injured or hurt, there's an insurance to make sure you pick that up. And a lot of private companies are not willing to do that. It's easier for them to create an easement or deed the land back to the city, because then it's not their responsibility anymore. But that works well also.
The mayor controls the numbers on the city planning commission. It's no secret. Yet the numbers aren't as swayed as 12 to 1. How do you see yourself being able to make this point and get cooperation so that you can get things through, like the kinds of projects that you're talking about here?
Well, I haven't started yet, so.
All right.
So
check me in a couple of months. Huh?
Check me in a couple of months. No, but I think the important thing is that you have to be a team player, and you have to be willing to have dialogue with other members of the community planning commission, and be able to state your case as to why your plan, your idea for the borough or for a certain part of the borough is a good one. And so it's getting them to buy in. And of course, the idea is to present a plan that's well thought out and not half-baked, so that you don't have the opposition at the end of the day.
You mentioned that, and we've talked about this at length on the show, and one of the long debated plans is the Kingsbridge Armory. Many people felt, and as I said, we've talked about it on the show, is that the task force presented an incomplete plan and kind of threw it back to the city and said, okay, Mr. Mayor and, of course, the Development Corporation, now you make a choice and you decide which is best. What is your vision about the Armory, and should we have a fuller plan at this point after all this time of waiting?
Well, I haven't been able to study the Armory as much as I would have liked to, but what I can tell you is at this point is that what we didn't need was another shopping mall. We would have been taking business away from Fordham Road, which is a viable shopping district at this point. We would have created jobs temporarily, and then once the construction was over, then what would have happened? We would have had a shopping mall that may or not stood empty at this time based on what's going on in the economy, and may or may not have taken interest away from Fordham Road. And then what you're doing is you're creating another pocket, another empty void at Fordham, may fill up Kingsbridge, and then from time to time you're going to see there's going to be a shuffle. Then Kingsbridge will be successful, and Fordham won't. And then Fordham becomes successful, and Kingsbridge won't.
And so you've never really added anything in your vision there. You're saying you're just kind of treading water, so to
There
speak.
really was no value, in my mind's eye, there was really no value added to having a huge shopping mall there.
Right.
And I think that what needs to happen is the community needs to be polled again, and there need to be charrettes, as the city planning is doing all throughout the city, to decide what would be best for that part of the community.
I do want to mention to our viewers, if you want to ask about your neighborhood or anything going on in your neighborhood, then of course you just call up and you can say, hey, we've got this area, for instance, and maybe Mr. Marin can help sort some of that through, or you can lay an idea on him that he can bring to the City Planning Commission. I want to go back also to what you said about developers and maybe the changing tide, which would come as welcome news to people in the Bronx who've been fighting so many different onslaughts over the last dozen years, if not longer. One of the issues is overdevelopment and out-of-context development that is choking neighborhoods. And you see it not only in one place, but whether it be Riverdale or Wakefield or certainly areas of the South Bronx. Your background is in housing and real estate planning. How do we solve the need for affordable housing that is not in a traditional block-busting way, which is what you're getting now in many areas? They'll take what was a two-family home, the owner will sell it, and the next thing you know, before anybody even breathes, they're coming in and they're putting up an 8-story building on a block that's barely designed for it and completely out of context with the rest of the neighborhood. How do we balance those two needs? One is certainly for housing, but two, the need to keep stable communities.
The City Planning Commission has begun to look at contextual zoning and has implemented contextual zoning throughout the city, which is to make sure that zoning districts are in conformance with existing districts, so that you don't have your 8-story, 12-story building in a pocket full of two-family homes. So I think that that's one of the first steps that they've taken to make sure that this happens. And the other thing is that developers, again, have to be a little bit sensitive to communities and understand that while they may think that this is what the community needs, it in fact hinders more positive development, because now you're creating negative stigmas. You're just putting up development just to put it up to make a buck and leave, and that's not what communities need or want.
We had a case which was recently publicized, and maybe this is different agencies going to butt heads with each other. The Board of Standards and Appeals recently gave a developer permission to continue an out-of-context development in Giles Place, which is actually not too far from here, over the well-organized objection of the people in the community who had fought the thing for 7 years. In essence, the developer, it was said the developer was too far along, and we basically can't stop him now. Again, how do we rope this in so this works with and not against communities that are fighting so hard for the solvency of their neighborhoods?
I'm surprised to hear that, because we have agencies in place that are supposed to protect us against this type of overdevelopment or not as of right development beyond the building what is allowed within zoning. And the building department is the first agency that takes a look at these new developments and plans for these developments. I'm really surprised that they didn't pick up on this to begin with. But
it was a complex legal thing. We don't need to go through all of it because basically they had gotten their objection in just at the deadline after he had already started. But we don't need to break it down. It's only one project.
Right.
But I'm just asking in general again how we keep this roped in for the benefit of the people of the Bronx.
That's a very specific, community-specific and site-specific question. I guess I would have to have more details on that site. But it is a problem, and the commission, the building department, has begun to see it. As a matter of fact, we had an issue like this in our community where we're still grappling on how we're going to deal with it, where a developer actually took a private parcel, While on the community board, we actually requested him to come in and share his plans and thoughts with us, and he refused. And he's actually overbuilt by 1 story, and we are grappling on what is going to be our response. And I say we, tongue in cheek.
In this case, you're wearing the community board hat.
Well, I'm not. That's why I say we, because as a result of my being appointed to the City Planning Commission, I've had to resign as chairman of Community Board 2. Right. Okay. So, unfortunately, I say we, like I said, tongue in cheek, because it's still part of, I live there, it's my community.
It's still part of your blood,
yes,
frankly.
It really is, although I'm not on the board
anymore.
You
can't take the boy out of the Bronx.
You sure can. Sure. You sure can. Now, when you serve on a community board, you know, I've been serving since 17.
Right. So what do you think the community board is going to do? Or that's a pretty big challenge.
The challenges are really taking a look at the project. You know, each project has to be site-specific, and you have to take each one as you see it. So it depends on, in my mind's eye, you know, is it worth asking the developer to take the overbuilt portion off? Or are we going to get some more affordable housing units that will fit in with the community and have community residents be able to afford into the building? You know, it's unfortunate this has happened, and I don't know all the specifics, but sometimes what you have to do is do your best with what's out there. And again, if we're going to get more affordable housing units, unfortunately, this developer is overbuilt, and it's not too much of an overbuilt situation. Consideration at the Board of Standards and Appeals is the first step when there is an overzoning.
And maybe what you said at the outset is ultimately what holds, and we know you haven't already begun, you know, to sit on the City Planning Commission. But if you set the tone that, you know, in our borough, this is how we're going to do it from now on, and every time you bring something that's out of context or like that, then that begins to the process of change. Oh, you know what, we better not talk to Orlando about that because he's not going to go for it. I mean, right?
True.
That's a fair
it is true. You have to have a representative on the commission that's going to be very attentive to the borough's needs, that's going to follow through and make sure that what's been planned and what's been thought for is of course, built, and that there is consideration for communities and understanding what they need.
Let's talk about this whole, and the borough president was very specific about one of the projects I'm about to mention, about this homeless population and how we're maneuvering, or the city is trying to maneuver communities around. The Bronx has 40% of the city's homeless population. People in Westchester Square have been very concerned because what they've done is they're taking a transient population, the homeless population, putting it in a place that was a residence for stable people. In essence, the same thing with the Muller Center up in Wakefield is happening, which wasn't necessarily a residence, but it was certainly a stable facility, and they're destabilizing that spot and consequently the neighborhood. Does this require a ULURP process, or is this one way to go through this process to protect communities? Is this a direction that, let's say, the people at Westchester Square and in Wakefield who've been fighting very hard, is this the way they can deal with this kind of thing?
Absolutely. The ULURP process is where this should have all begun. When you are changing a use, especially when you are programming a building for a specific target population like the homeless, there should be a ULURP process identifying what's there going to be a change, what the change is going to be in the use of that building.
Mm-hmm. So your recommendation for the people who would be fighting those issues are, let's take that up and go through whatever legal process you can to make sure there's a ULURP process
Absolutely,
involved.
and it is respected, and at the end of the day, everyone comes out winning.
Of course, you know, I giggled a little when you said that it's respected because, of course, many times we've had these various impact statements of all sorts, and it's like they say one thing, but they have no bearing because the powers that be just simply ignore them, which would raise another question. Is the ULURP process, is it necessary for the ULURP process right now to be strengthened in some way that would help protect communities?
I think the ULURP process has been fine-tuned from when I first knew about the ULURP process back in the 70s. And it has been fine-tuned such that there's careful thought and a process put forth so that there are no loopholes and that it takes its toll, it takes its process of where it should be. And people are beginning to, and they've understood it for a while, that the ULURP process is something that has to be considered when you're making these type of changes.
I'm going to ask you about a project that's already undergone a renovation, and that was the renovation at Pelham Parkway. And the city had a proposal, and we did it on the show, and everybody was like, oh, this is the only way we can do it. Unfortunately, we have to lose, I forget what the number was, 150 trees, something like that. And then with the outrage of the community and the borough president, to his credit, was told, you know what, this doesn't necessarily have to be this way, and the whole plan was redone. The people around the Jerome Park Reservoir right near here are about to engage in a similar fight with the Parks Department and the DEP, who are thinking about destroying hundreds of trees. I guess the answer then becomes the same. It's a matter of standing up and saying, you know what, this doesn't go on in our borough.
Well, the scare with Pelham Parkway came to a head as a result of the storms that we were having, the age of the trees on Pelham Parkway. So there was a concern that there would be a liability issue. People would get hurt. Homes would be destroyed. So the first, response was, let's cut down these trees, these huge trees that have created this issue. It's Mother Nature, and we have to be honestly. And you experience the city. One of the things I admire about the City Planning Commission is how they've interpreted how you view the city. And as a pedestrian, we don't look up. We actually see to a certain vantage point, and 30 feet, 40 feet up. And the trees lining streets not only give us a pleasant view, give us oxygen, clean the air. And the fear of these trees falling is a valid one, but you also have to consider the benefits of these trees. And so there wasn't really a quick study to see which trees were valid or not. They were just very concerned about which trees should come down because of the storms. And they had to rethink that because the people were saying, wait a minute, this will happen, and we just, we can't cut down every tree as a result.
My sense is that's as good an example as we've had recently of people of the Bronx taking a hold of something and actually having impact on something they were not so pleased about.
People are beginning to realize, with the advent of social media, people are beginning to realize, and even those that don't use social media are beginning to realize that, it's in numbers that you get a good response. And so they organized. It wasn't through social media, but they organized and they made their point. Save our trees. Let's keep our trees. And they certainly did.
Let's talk about a project that, again, I repeat that we've covered it on our show, and that was the whole notion of the Sheridan Expressway and whether the Sheridan should be taken down. First of all, before we even ask about some of the specifics, do you have a feeling on that? Should the Sheridan come down? Or is it one of those things where it serves its purpose by helping to divert some of the traffic?
I don't think the Sheridan should come down. I've ridden the Sheridan since I'm a little kid. It was a way for us to get onto the Bruckner Expressway, and
rarely gets backed up.
Or rarely gets backed up. Well, when I was a kid, it got backed up a lot. So we're lucky today.
I can only speak for now. Then.
No, it really gets backed up, and it's been a bone of contention for a while, specifically with a lot of folks that live in that area. And there's a happy medium. There's going to be a happy medium. City Planning Commission has actually put together a task force, of which I was a member of as the chairman of Community Board 2.
And now wearing the other hat.
Now I'm on the other side of the Planning Commission, so I can't participate in the task force anymore. But the task force is beginning to take thoughts and ideas from the community to meld them into one complete.
What would a midpoint be? It seems to me you're either taking it down or you're not. If you take it down, then you can debate what should be there. What would a midpoint be? Or a compromise of some sort?
A compromise would be, in my mind's eye, platforming over the Sheridan, as we've seen with the consolidation of the housing projects on Park Avenue many years ago, where they built over the Park Avenue Railroad.
So platforming over it, and then what goes on top of those platforms?
Well, you have Starlight Park, which is on the opposite side. A myriad of things. You can have some shopping.
And still maintain some of the traffic that goes
Absolutely,
across?
Because what will happen is you're creating a tunnel. So you're going to be, my ideas of platforming over is creating a tunnel so the Sheridan continues to exist.
Is there money to do that? Could there be money to do that?
There could be money to do that, but and again, this is something that's a long-term project that wouldn't take one development phase. We're talking about a few development phases, an injection of anywhere between 700 and 2,000 units of housing, some retail, a little bit of park to augment Starlight
I guess
Park.
one of the issues, and I hear this all the time with all different projects, again, certainly with the Jerome Park Reservoir, frankly, people might have seen, I put an op-ed piece in one of the local papers about it, is that they come out with a phase 1, and then everybody gets started, but then they don't have phase 2 and phase 3, or the economy changes, or the politics changes, and all of a sudden the people who are waiting for phase 2 and 3 for a long-term project don't get to see that. I guess that could be a fear if you talk about a number of phases for the Sheraton.
It could be a fear, but if you have commitment and if you decide that this is a long-range plan, I mean, look at the mayor's Plan YC. It's not something that was meant to unfold itself in 5 or 10 years. It was meant to unfold itself over a period of years and took into consideration many changes that would occur as a result of starting the implementation of the plan. Likewise, here, you're going to have a situation where it's going to take a while in terms of funding, but if you have the commitment to make this happen, you know, the first structure would be the platform. Second structure would be a couple of the buildings.
I wonder if there's a way to, certify that this is going to happen, but I guess...
We'll see. We don't know. We'll have to fight for
My
it.
last question, and we're preciously out of time, as we always seem to be. How do you protect the Bronx? Many people are concerned that, you know what, you talk about big development, but then all of a sudden the people who've lived there for years are no longer welcome because the housing is out of context economically and they can't live there. Especially in the southwest Bronx, there's a lot of rumors out there with the Gateway Mall that this is really a long-term plan for somebody else, not to benefit the people of the Bronx. How do we protect against that?
We protect against that by taking our residents and making sure they're well educated and they are prepared for the workforce. Part of the problem is that our borough, as a result of the fires of the 70s, we were left with the poorest of the poor. We had nowhere to go, and I say we because I was part of that. And we had to maintain here. Mm-hmm. And as a result, you know, there were pockets of poverty created through certain programs, all for the benefit of the borough. I don't see this as a negative. I see this as a positive because we've learned from it and we're moving forward.
Okay, boy, I would love to pursue it, but we're out of time, and so we're going to have to invite you back when you get a little more seniority on that.
And I will be more than happy to come back,
because there's just so much to talk about. Orlando Marin.
Yeah, I was just warming up here.
Good luck, and congratulations on the appointment.
Thank you.
And
sir.
then we have more. Well, we love talking the Bronx here. Maybe a way to educate the people of the Bronx is to have them watch our show. That
Sure.
would be nice. Folks, if you have further questions or comments on anything you heard on tonight's show, anything going on in the Bronx, then email them to us at bronxtalk@hotmail.com, and we'll read those on the air during a future edition of our program. Archives of Bronx Talk available at bronxnet.org. You click Bronx Talk, which is on the right-hand navigation bar. You can watch any show you want. And we'll see you next Monday night, and every Monday night at 9 for Bronx Talk. Special thanks to producer Jane Folloro, director Michael Arias, Dina, and everybody else, the cast of thousands that's around us here in the studio. And to you, good night.
Along with weight loss, it's one of the many ways to fight osteoarthritis pain. For more information on managing pain, go to fightarthritispain.org.